Welcome, everyone. I am very happy to introduce you to a marvelous professional from Denmark, and she is a biologist, a health coach, and an alternative therapist specializing in Parkinson's sufferers, helping them have a better quality of life. For the last 7 years, she's researched and developed techniques and therapies that are beneficial to reducing the stress that's involved in the Parkinson's diagnosis. So thank you very much, Lilian Sjoeberg, for coming on with me. I really appreciate your time today, and I'm anxious for my listeners and viewers to learn from you. So welcome.
Thank you for having me here.
So tell us a little bit about your practice.
I, 7 years ago, heard some stories about a person that got back to better health from having sclerosis. And I became so curious that I started to dig into this area of chronic diseases. And at that time, I was a newly educated coach and therapist. So I made a small experiment with 4 people with chronic diseases. And I knew that I couldn't do a lot. I gave them 5 long sessions each, but I started to dig into what could I as a new coach do to them. And we selected small areas of their problems, tremor with Parkinson, a hand that couldn't move with a person with sclerosis, and there was a woman with burning mouth syndrome, and then a war veteran that has pretty bad symptoms due to that. And then I found out that if you sort of went into the detail and helped them with a small thing, that we could solve them. And then if you can solve one thing, you can take another thing. And then I slowly found out that it's the way to help these people.
So how much of these illnesses have a mental component, would you say?
I have focused mostly on people with Parkinson, but there are other people out there, and I've used a ton of hours to dig into what was going on here. So other people think that it's 90, not 19, but 90% of all chronic diseases, and maybe 90% of all diseases that have this big component of stress.
Okay, so let's talk about stress. What are some of the things that cause stress that lead to illness?
I think if it's okay, I start another place, and sharing this, I've made that instead of thinking about how much is stress and how much is something else, we just dig into the stress and see how far we can come with this. So right now there's a belief that there's a core of symptoms that are sort of genetic or caused by toxins or something like that. But if we push that to a side and start digging with a focus on stress, then time will tell if there's a core of symptoms. But everybody knows that symptoms vary. It's pretty obvious with people with Parkinson that they have a tremor or stiffness one moment, and 1 moment later or 1 hour later, they have no tremor or no stiffness. And to dig into what's the difference between the situation where they have symptoms and the situation where they have none, you can learn a lot, and we can help this person with the stress that causes the symptom in that. So that's the basic principle I work from. Forget about the what you think about the disease, but digging into stress, reducing any stress, and then you will find out if there's a core or not. Reducing 50% or 60% or 90%, that's also good, or even 5 or 10% symptoms reduction. So that's a basic principle. And trust me, when you start to dig into this, you'll find that there's a lot of stress, and maybe most of it is stress. It's more a matter of how long time people continue doing this.
So stress relief is at the core of your practice, helping
Yes.
people learn how to let go of stress, whether it's a past memory that's stressing them or a current situation. Maybe there's a person in their life that when they enter the room,
Exactly.
the stress magnifies.
Exactly.
And you teach them how to somehow let go of that. I guess like letting go of a balloon and letting the balloon float away.
That's one way. It's so different from person to person what's the root cause for the stress. But I listen to that when people are talking. Do they have a toxic spouse? Were they bullied in school? Have they been in a car accident? Have they had some parents that were very strict or maybe even violent to them? Or what was going on?
Well, when you mention the car accident, physical things can be stress too. A physical injury can be stress.
Yeah, and it can be in so many ways that it can be the actual injury that causes you some stress, but it can also be the trauma around the accident that causes you some stress. But if you look up even wound healing, and if you have a fracture, it heals faster if you are not stressed. You can find studies around that as well.
So you mentioned studies. So I know a lot of your research has been into the scientific literature about.
Yes, I started simply 3 years where I used 3 to 5 hours every day and found studies. I found YouTube videos, homepages where they talked into stress connected with a disease. And I think you can nearly for any disease find studies where they investigate how stress affects the symptom from this and that disease.
And yet this is not very widely known. It seems to me that you are a pioneer in this, that you're pioneering a whole different approach, a whole new paradigm with which to view these chronic illnesses like Parkinson's.
Yeah, there's a lot of scientists, they sort of say it must be in the brain. It must be some neuron, some chemicals, something going on in the brain. And maybe it is, but if you take the bigger picture and say we are a part of mammals. Mammals have instincts, and if these instincts are triggered, you get into, we call it fight, flight, and freeze. It's a lot more complicated than that, but if we sort of accept that we are part of the mammal and have these instincts, then things become so much easier to understand. So you can be calm and with no symptoms, and then somebody knocks on the door and you get a fright, and then you get symptomatic, to have a very simple picture. When you're on vacation, sitting and looking at the sunset at a lake, you probably have no symptoms because everything is good and there's no task or obligation, and hopefully you are together with friendly people, then the stress is low and there's no symptoms.
And you would think it would be evident that stress was triggering this, and yet people still don't see it. That's fascinating. Did you have other slides here that you wanted to show us?
Yeah, we can maybe take the video I talked about now, because
Okay.
I've studied all this for years, and I'm looking at our, can we call it cousins, the mammals, and I've been looking in history to see what was going on, and I found this video. So let's hear. This is based on old video clips from World War I, where they say 15% of the soldiers came home with physical symptoms, even they haven't been touched of a bomb or shot. So this guy is actually talking about this phenomenon that extreme stress can put you into fight, flight, and freeze, and this can give you physical symptoms. So this is pretty interesting, this video, but let's see what he's saying.
During the First World War, a new condition emerged that caught the military and medical establishment completely off guard.
And you can see here there's a lot
There
of
was no
Parkinson
telling who
symptoms.
would be affected by it or why. Those who suffered from it might be hypnotized or electrocuted, arrested or shot, all for the same illness. So many men were lost to it, there would be a revolution in military attitudes and a new field of medicine created. The condition was called shell shock.
These are the men whose minds the dead have ravished. Memory fingers in their hair of murders. Multitudinous murders they once witnessed.
So this is young men during wartime getting
I think it
physical
was a wonderful
symptoms.
term because it described it quite perfectly.
To the Army's alarm, more and more cases of shell shock began to appear. After just 6 months of war, 15% of the British Army was judged to be suffering from the condition. The most extreme cases were blind, deaf, mute, or shaking, yet all without an apparent cause, other than their proximity to bombardment. Similar cases appeared in the French and German armies on the Western Front.
The shell shock are the symptoms of a mental purge.
This footage, filmed at the Royal Victoria at the height of the war, is an extraordinary record of the impact of war on the minds of men. The doctors, feeling their way, decided that the men were suffering from hysterical conversion symptoms. That is, the men's mental distress produced a physical symptom: rigid limbs, extreme shivering, or loss of speech. In this case, a deaf man responds only to the word bomb.
Somehow the mind splits itself off from the body, that they're almost two distinct entities. And we see this after exposure to very traumatic and upsetting events. We know that some of the war psychiatrists talk about people going blind because they just can't bear seeing the carnage around them.
The doctors at Netley began to classify the different symptoms. They gave their patients' conditions outlandish names: hysterical dancing gait, hysterical slippery ice gait.
So that was a video around how young men get physical symptoms due to big stressors, but where they're not wounded. So the same phenomenon can you see in older people, even they haven't been to war, but a life filled with different stressors. So it's sort of sum up after more years, but have sort of the same expression. And this, what we see is extreme cases of fight, flight, and freeze.
That's something, because these modern day stressors, the symptoms are less pronounced and maybe come on more gradually, but it seems to be like the same phenomena, that stress creates a manifestation in the flesh, in the muscles, in the structure of the body.
Now
Like
that's
the
exactly the same here. It's young people that in maybe a few months or half a year get extreme exposure to stress, and you see it with all the chronic diseases after a long life of stressful events. So there's a huge amount of my clients that have some pretty terrible stories to tell. It can also be a ton of small stressors during a life.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also the stress where you are getting a lot of ambitions, where you must perform very well and get good grades in school and perform well in job and be the successful leader, salesperson. That's also something that can cause stress. And then one day during your life, it's too much for the body, and you start getting symptoms, and then you get a diagnosis. But you could call a lot of these diseases for PTSD because it's sort of the same symptoms, but something you get after a long life.
Well, I love the name of your practice, the Hope Shortcut. So tell us a little bit about the hope that you believe you can offer people that are maybe just getting a Parkinson's diagnosis or maybe living with it for a very long time. Are there hope for both types of people?
There is lots of hope. And the hope is what I'm actually doing now. Of course, I can continue for hours, but breaking the old beliefs. Because the first thing happens when you come to a doctor, they say, okay, you have got this and that disease and you can never become better. And then people's mood and hope stops, and they spiral down in despair of something. And then so it's to break that spell that I put on these guys. Of course, everyone have a chance. In cancer disease, you are told that you have a 10% chance of survival or 50% chance of survival. But in these chronic diseases, they are told there's nothing to do, and it's not the truth, because I have searched a lot on the internet. I have found people, I think nearly regardless of what diagnosis you find, you can find at least one person that has maybe not become worse or become better, or maybe have continued and do not have a lot of symptoms, or maybe no symptoms at all.
So it sounds like you're saying that people should reject any sort of fatalistic prognosis of their diagnosis. They should basically assume the best, not the worst, because I would think that it would spiral things downward once you embrace the fatalistic view that there's no hope.
Yeah. So of course you have your unique chance of doing something about this. And of course, if you are 99 years old, probably difficult to do a lot because you could catch something and die tomorrow, who knows? But the younger you are, the more physical active you are, the day you get the diagnosis, you have your unique chance of doing a lot. And there are people out there that have succeeded. And the interesting thing is that I've only found one doctor that keep a record and have made a questionnaire asking which things in your life make your symptoms smaller. And they come up with a lot of different types of exercises. Most doctors expect that you get worse and worse, and if you complain about this and that, they give you more medication.
Mm-hmm.
And if they
So your
onboarded
approach-
all the good things, I mean, in the Parkinson world, I think it's becoming well known that dancing is good and boxing is good and biking is good and art workshops. Start listening to that instead, because if you have 2 good hours after some sort of class, that's the signal you should listen to. Okay, maybe I should do a little more. Maybe I should do it every day. Maybe I should do it 2 times a day to keep these stress symptoms down, because that's what happened. All these good things, they help you to reduce your stress.
That's awesome. And they say that listening to classical music is very therapeutic. I think that that's an awesome point, that there are beautiful, lovely activities that you can do that stimulate the different regions of the brain, that unleash your creative qualities, that may produce a lot of symptom relief. And so
for example, classic music.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think it's good?
I think it's probably good because usually it's a large orchestra with many different instruments operating on many different pitches and tones. And so I think that bombardment of beauty and how it all synergizes together, and I'm probably different parts of your brain hear different instruments.
And the most important things that happen is that while listening to this, and it's actually not important if it's what sort of music it is, but if it's music you like, then you focus on the music. You do not focus on the bills you need to pay, and you do not focus about the big pile of work on the desk tomorrow, and you do not focus on the quarrel you had with your sister yesterday. So you are what we call mindful. You are in the now, listening to all the things, and especially classic music. It's so complex, so you if you like it, you can focus on a lot of things, and then you are in the now, then you are mindful, and that's where you are calm. But the second you start to think about tomorrow's challenges and get fearful, or you start to regret what you did yesterday, then your symptoms spiral up again. And to be very, very nerdy with this, because every person have maybe 10, 20, 50, 100 of these different small and big stressors, but taking one at a time and finding out what's your pile of stress, we slowly remove them one after the other. So it's a detective's work to reduce all this stress.
It sounds like a really wonderful alternative option for people, and I'm so glad that I met you. We just a chance meeting online led to this interview, and I would encourage everyone to look at the show notes. We will put Lilian's website there, her contact information, and maybe a link to that World War I video, because that's pretty interesting and people should share that with their friends. Thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for giving people hope in spite of the bleak outcomes that they've been told are their future. I really like the fact that you're trying to give them a shortcut to hope and give them a better life. So thank you, Lilian.
Yes, thank you. And the shortcut is me using these 5 years to collect all this knowledge, and I, of course, share it so people can sort of jump this first 3 to 5 years and build on my shoulders instead of using the time themselves.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed meeting you, and we'll end the show here. Thank you.